Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into the Formula One Chinese Grand Prix from today, March 22nd, 2025. And we've got a lot to unpack. You guys sent in a bunch of F1 blogs. So our mission today is to really go beyond the surface, unpack some of the big stories from this race weekend. We'll try to understand the challenges the drivers faced. But mostly, we want to dig into some specific performances. I'm talking Carlos Sainz in the Williams and Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin.
Absolutely. Yeah, lots to talk about. Seems like both those drivers had some pretty complex weekends.
Yeah, for sure.
So we really want to understand what happened, really get into the nitty-gritty of their performance. What does this all mean for the race tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly.
And we have a ton of great F1 blogs to work with, covering qualifying, the sprint race, and then really focusing on Sainz and Alonso, those two Spanish drivers. Plus, we'll touch on the overall grid performance. It should be an interesting deep dive today. Lots to learn.
Yeah, lots to learn, absolutely. So let's jump right in. It's pretty clear Sainz had a tough time in qualifying.
Yeah, it was a difficult Saturday for him.
So let's start there. What are the F1 blogs saying about the difficulties he's had with that Williams FW47?
Well, first off, the team itself had a bit of a hiccup.
Oh, okay.
They actually got slapped with a 50,000 euro fine.
50,000? That's a lot.
It is. Apparently, there was a procedural error with some camera footage they're supposed to submit of flexing wings.
Uh-huh.
The important thing here is, according to the F1 blogs, they weren't trying to hide anything illegal.
Right, so no cheating, just a paperwork issue.
Exactly, just an administrative oversight. But still, 50,000 euros is a chunk of change.
Yeah, no kidding. So that was off track. But on the track, Sainz only managed to qualify 15th.
Yep, way back in 15th.
A far cry from his teammate Albon. He was up in the top 10.
Yeah, Albon had a much better day qualifying P10.
So what are the F1 blogs saying about why Sainz struggled so much?
Well, according to the reports and some quotes from Sainz himself, he just wasn't feeling it in the car. He felt like that great pace he had in preseason testing just wasn't there.
Interesting.
He says he can get up to speed, initially, but he's just not improving as the qualifying session progresses. Like, he's not getting the same performance out of the tires as other drivers, especially compared to Albon.
Huh.
He really noticed this difference between Q1 and Q2.
Mm-hmm.
He set a decent time in that first session, Q1, but then in Q2, he just couldn't find any more pace.
Yeah, it's going to be frustrating.
Very much so. And it kind of points to either a car that's not adapting well to the track as it evolves, or maybe Sainz isn't quite maximizing the grip as the track rubbers in. It's hard to tell from the F1 blogs alone. It's something Williams will definitely need to figure out.
Yeah, big question mark there.
Yeah. Is it the car? Is it the setup? Or is it something Sainz needs to adjust in his driving style?
So he knows this is an area he needs to work on.
He does. Sainz was quoted saying, he needs to really pay attention to this. He needs more time to get comfortable, to figure out the car and how to find those extra tenths. Working closely with his engineers, I'm sure, to analyze all the data.
Yeah, totally. It's still early days. Only his second race with a new team. A learning curve is to be expected, right?
For sure. Adapting to a new car and a new team takes time. And you have to remember, every car is different, has its own quirks.
Totally. And the F1 blogs make it pretty clear that he's had very different experiences with the Williams in these first few races. He was feeling pretty confident after Bahrain, but then Shanghai and Australia haven't been so kind.
Yeah, spot on. He specifically said the car felt really different here in Shanghai compared to Bahrain, which really explains some of his struggles. And Australia was kind of a mixed bag. He was quick in some sessions, but then in Q3, when you really need to find that ultimate pace, he struggled. It might be that this Williams is very sensitive to track specifics. Maybe the setup window is really narrow.
So tough to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah.
And for the race, it sounds like Sainz felt better about things, generally better suited to the longer race distance. But then that sprint race happened, and, well, the F1 blogs don't paint a pretty picture.
Yeah, the tire issues, it seems like both Williams cars really suffered with that graining.
Big time, yeah. They had a lot of graining, which means the tire surface overheats and little bits of rubber start breaking off.
Yeah.
That obviously messes with the grip, and you lose performance.
Not good.
Not good at all. Sainz started 13th, but dropped all the way back to 17th. He had a pit because the tires were just toast.
Ouch.
And one of the F1 blogs actually quoted him after the sprint race, and he didn't mince words. He said, and I'll try my best Spanish here, "Así no vamos a ningún lado." which basically translates to like this: we're not going anywhere.
Straight to the point.
Yeah, no sugarcoating. And
Yeah.
he pointed out that the setup and tire degradation issues here in China are a stark contrast to how well the car performed in Bahrain and even in parts of Australia.
So back to the drawing board.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The F1 blogs say they made a ton of setup changes after the sprint race, trying to find some answers, both for qualifying and the main race.
Fingers crossed for them.
Yeah, they need something. It's interesting, too, because one of the F1 blogs mentioned he felt uncomfortable in the car from day one, like right from the first practice session.
Yeah, I read that too.
If you're not comfortable, it's tough to build up that confidence.
Yeah,
And it just makes it that much harder to find the limit.
absolutely. So new team, new car, lots of things to adapt to.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that even for these experienced drivers, changing teams is a huge adjustment.
So they made all these setup changes, but qualifying didn't go any better, still stuck in 15th.
Yep, same story. And Sainz actually said that those changes were specifically aimed at fixing that graining issue from the sprint race. But making big setup changes like that, it's a gamble, especially when you're trying to figure it out on the fly during qualifying.
High pressure situation.
Exactly. He even said he felt a bit lost at the beginning of qualifying, trying to get a handle on the new setup.
He mentioned the odd thing again too, right? Being faster in Q1 than in Q2.
Yeah, that's definitely not normal.
What does that even mean?
Honestly, it's hard to say for sure. It could be that he's getting a good initial lap when the tires are fresh and the track is clean. But then, as the track rubbers in and the grip levels change, maybe he's just not adapting as well as others. Or it could be something in the car setup that's making it unpredictable as the track evolves. But whatever it is, he knows it's costing him grid positions.
Yeah, a big puzzle to solve. So what's his outlook for the race?
Well, naturally, he wants to overtake everybody, but he's also realistic.
Yeah.
He said it's going to be tough because they just don't think they have the pace this weekend, especially after that sprint race.
And he said some things felt better after the changes, but not everything.
Right. Some corners felt good. He had more grip. The balance was better. But other parts of the track, not so much. That's usually what happens with big setup changes. It's hard to find a solution that works perfectly everywhere.
Yeah, it's all about compromise.
Yep. Finding the best overall balance. So they're working hard, but they're still missing something, still searching for that perfect setup window.
Okay, so lots to think about there with Sainz and the Williams team.
Definitely.
Let's switch gears and talk about Fernando Alonso. What are the F1 blogs saying about his weekend with that Aston Martin AMR 25? He also qualified outside the top 10, down in 13th.
Yeah, he did. But it seems like his situation is a bit different than Sainz. He didn't make it into Q3 either, but the F1 blogs suggest he seemed quite positive about things. It sounds like they were really focusing on making changes to improve the tire degradation for the race.
Okay, so maybe sacrificing some qualifying performance for a better race.
Exactly. It seems that was the strategy. He was pretty open about it, saying he doesn't think a one-stop strategy is going to be possible. He's expecting a lot of tire wear. And after that sprint race where we finished 10th, they've definitely shifted their focus to tire management for the main event.
Makes sense. And it's interesting, the F1 blogs are saying Aston Martin's actually going to try the hard tires for the first time this weekend in the race.
Yeah, they saved both sets of the hard tires. So they're clearly hoping that those hard tires will be more durable and give them a longer stint. Might be a bit of a gamble, though, because they haven't actually run them yet. So they don't have any real data on how they'll perform.
But based on what they saw in the sprint race, they think it's worth a shot.
Yeah, I think so. That sprint race gave them a lot of valuable information about tire wear.
Oh, absolutely. I got to tell you, I loved that moment reading in one of the F1 blogs where Alonso kind of forgot who was ahead of him in the points. He's talking about the Toro Rossos.
Ah, yes. Showing his age a bit there.
Just a little bit, but
Yeah.
it just shows how tight that midfield battle is this year.
It really does. When you can't even remember who's ahead of you in the points, it means it's close. Anyone can jump up or down the order depending on how their weekend goes.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Now, the F1 blogs also mentioned that Alonso was pretty open about the fact that Aston Martin are still experimenting with the AMR 25, trying things they couldn't test earlier in the season.
Yeah, he was very upfront about that. He said that the wet weather and what he called a weird test in Bahrain meant they had to delay some of their planned evaluations. And they took the opportunity to do some of that testing here in China because the rules allowed for it. They could make changes between the sprint race and qualifying.
So what kind of things were they testing?
Well, Alonso specifically mentioned some aerodynamic tests they couldn't do in Bahrain.
Uh-huh.
They were going to do them either here in China or in Japan, and they decided to go for it here.
Okay.
And then he also mentioned some other changes they made. specifically trying to improve the front tire degradation. Remember, that was a big issue for them in the sprint race.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So do they know if these changes are actually working?
It's hard to say for sure. Alonso said it's difficult to judge the impact of these changes based on qualifying alone.
Right.
They'll really know once they get into the race. So it's possible these changes made the car a bit slower in qualifying. But they're hoping it pays off with better tire management in the race.
So a bit of a gamble.
Absolutely. High risk, high reward. And that decision to save the hard tires definitely points to a strategy focused on the race. They're banking on those hard tires being more durable, less prone to graining.
So what's Alonso's take on his chances for points in the race?
Well, he admitted that starting 13th, it's going to be a tough ask. But he also said they'll give it their all, of course. He felt like they could have maybe gotten one car into Q3 in the earlier qualifying session, but they just couldn't repeat that performance in the main qualifying. He even suggested that maybe other teams just did a better job learning the track and improving their setups as the weekend progressed.
So falling behind a bit.
Yeah, seems like it. And he also mentioned that he felt like they lost a bit of time during those warm-up laps in qualifying. Not ideal tire preparation.
Which is crucial, right?
Absolutely. Getting those tires in the right temperature window before you start pushing for a fast lap is so important. And he said that the traffic and other drivers doing their own thing out on track made it tricky to get a clean lap and really prepare the tires properly.
So those little details can really add up.
They can. And in the end, maybe that's what cost them a few tenths in a shot at Q3. So it seems like they're taking a long-term approach, maybe sacrificing a bit of qualifying pace for a better race result. So we'll have to see if it pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's not forget about the sprint race itself. Alonso finished 10th, so he got a point. But the F1 blogs suggest it wasn't exactly smooth sailing for him.
No, not at all. He actually reported an issue with the engine early on in the sprint. Something with the electrical power delivery.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for the first 7 or 8 laps, he just didn't have the same power as usual.
That's a big problem.
It is. And it definitely cost him some time and positions. And on top of that, he had the same tire degradation issues as Sainz.
Oof, double whammy.
Pretty much. He said the degradation was worse than they expected, especially on the front tires.
Which probably explains why they're focusing so much on fixing that for the race.
Exactly. That sprint race really gave them some valuable data. They're using that to try and find solutions for the main event.
So, despite all the problems, it was a good learning experience.
Yeah, Alonso actually called it a second free practice, a chance to really push the car and see how it behaves in race conditions. And that information is crucial for making setup decisions for the longer race distance.
Okay, so lots to unpack there with Alonso and Aston Martin.
Yeah, lots going on.
Now, let's zoom out a little bit. What about the rest of the grid? What are some of the other big storylines from the F1 blogs?
Well, the biggest story has to be Oscar Piastri taking pole position, his first ever pole in F1.
Wow, what a moment for him.
Incredible. He beat out Russell, who was second, and Norris in third. A real statement from McLaren.
Yeah, they're looking strong this weekend.
Very strong. Definitely a shakeup of the expected order. And it just shows you how competitive things are this year. Nobody expected Piastri to be on pole.
Yeah, big surprise. And remember earlier when Alonso was talking about the Toro Rossos?
Yes. The Racing Bulls.
Right, the Racing Bulls. He wasn't the only one struggling to keep track. The F1 blogs keep talking about how incredibly close that midfield battle is.
It is unbelievably tight. From 4th place all the way down to 20th, it's anyone's game. A 10th here, a 10th there, and you can jump up or down several positions.
Yeah, that's what pushed Alonso and Sainz down the order.
Exactly. Even a small mistake can be really costly.
So back to McLaren. Their performance this weekend with Piastri on pole, it's a big change from what we saw in Australia, right?
Absolutely. They seem to have made a significant step forward with the car. It's clearly quick, and now they need to convert that pace into a good result on Sunday.
Can they do it?
That's the big question. They've got the speed, but can they execute a clean race and avoid any mistakes? We'll have to see.
Can't wait to find out. Now, Lando Norris, the championship leader, he didn't seem too happy with his Saturday, even though he qualified third.
Yeah, he was pretty critical of his own performance. He had a rough time in the sprint race and said his qualifying wasn't great either. He even said that while the McLaren might be the fastest car, it's also proving to be quite tricky to drive.
Interesting. So fast, but difficult to handle.
Yeah, it seems like it. He's going to have his work cut out for him on Sunday, trying to keep those other guys behind him.
Big challenge. And what about the usual suspects, Verstappen and Hamilton? They're a bit further down the order than we're used to seeing them.
Yeah, Verstappen qualified 4th and Hamilton 5th.
Not ideal.
Not ideal, no. They both said they don't think they have the fastest car this weekend, but those guys are both so experienced, so talented, they can never be counted out. They'll be pushing hard for that podium, maybe even the win.
Yeah, absolutely. A few other interesting things from qualifying. Leclerc got out-qualified by his Ferrari teammate again.
Yep, that's becoming a bit of a pattern, isn't it? Not a good look for Leclerc.
And over at Racing Bulls, Hadjar actually beat out Tsunoda.
Yeah, bit of a surprise there. Hadjar is still a rookie, while Tsunoda has a lot more experience. Shows you that anything can happen in this sport.
Absolutely. And then poor Lawson, he qualified last.
Yeah, not a good day for him. Sounds like they're struggling a bit over at that team.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Sainz, Alonso, the rest of the grid, the surprises, the struggles. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, what are your key takeaways? What are the big things we learned from the F1 blogs?
Well, for Sainz, the main takeaway is that he's just not performing at the level we saw in preseason testing. He's struggling to adapt to this Williams car, and the tire degradation is a major problem. He and the team have a lot of work to do to figure out what's going on.
So an uphill battle for him?
Yeah, definitely.
And what about Alonso?
For Alonso, it seems like they're playing the long game. They're focusing on the race, even if it means sacrificing a bit of qualifying performance. They're experimenting with setup changes, trying the hard tires, trying to find that sweet spot for tire management.
So all about strategy.
Very much so.
And then, of course, we have that incredibly tight midfield battle.
Yeah, it's going to be a dogfight out there.
Yeah.
Anyone can move up or down the order. And with Piastri on pole, who knows what's going to happen on Sunday.
So much to look forward to.
I can't wait for the race. This could be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. These F1 blogs really highlight what makes Formula One so fascinating. It's all about pushing the limits, finding those tiny margins of improvement.
It is. And it's a constant battle between the drivers and the engineers. The drivers are pushing the cars to the limit, providing feedback. And then the engineers are analyzing that data, tweaking the setup, trying to make the car just a little bit faster, a little bit better.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so exciting. It's unpredictable.
So one last thought for everyone listening. We've talked a lot about the drivers, the teams, the strategy. But don't forget, at the end of the day, it's the cars that really dictate what's possible. These incredibly complex machines, with their own unique characteristics and quirks, they ultimately shape the race.
Very true. So as you watch the race tomorrow, think about that. How much influence does the car itself have on the outcome? Is it all about raw speed, tire management, or maybe even a little bit of luck? It's a fascinating question, and that's what makes Formula One so captivating.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back next week to break down all the action from the Chinese Grand Prix.